Welcome to Page One, the show for writers with the reader in mind. Here's your host, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, welcome to Page One. I'm Zita Christian. In October, the Bushnell is going to present a one-woman show based on an adaptation of a memoir. It's a civil rights memoir. It's called Warriors Don't Cry, and it's about integrating Central High School in 1957. If you are a regular viewer of Page One, you saw an earlier show in which we interviewed the director, Richard Avon, and the actress, Almeria Campbell. Tonight, we're going to talk about adapting the book and why we think it is so important. So please join me in welcoming my guests. First to my right, Scott Galbraith, Vice President of Programs at the Bushnell. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Thank you, thank you. And to your right, Sonja Larkin-Thorne, one of our Bushnell trustees. Sonja, thank you very much for being on the show tonight.
And thank you for the opportunity. I'm very excited about it.
Good. Oh, I'm glad. Now, I can say that I wanted to pick this book to adapt because of the various ones that I read, that I was considering. This is the one that got me so emotional. I got angry. Mm-hmm. I had a sense of hope and a sense of triumph. And there were times when I could feel clenching my fist. I remembered things from my childhood. There were times when my eyes got watery. There were times when I went, yes! And over the whole course of it, I thought, if a book can move me to that extent, and I've read a lot of books, then this is one that we want to work on and adapt. But Scott, for the benefit of those in the audience who have not read Warriors Don't Cry, could you give us a little thumbnail of what the book's about?
Absolutely. It is a chronicle, really, of the integration of Central High School in 1957, as told by one of the participants, one of the Little Rock Nine, who lived that historic time in our history. And so it goes through the entire course of that year, focusing, yes, on the history of it, and there is history lesson in there, but it's so secondary to the human story, the human struggle. And it really puts a very personal touch on an otherwise historical time period that, honestly, I hadn't. I mean, I studied the Little Rock and Central High School and the integration as part of my studies, but I never really understood until reading Warriors Don't Cry that it was a year-long process. I didn't get that from my studies. I thought it was a snapshot in history, not an entire life, a year's life of a student. So just that eye-opening part for me was extraordinary. But then to understand on a day-to-day level of what that struggle meant in very real terms, it's. I agree. It causes you to be enraged, but at the same time, it's a fascinating read.
Yes.
That's very difficult to put down.
Absolutely. Now, I will also say that this past summer at the Bushnell, we held 2 community forums, or this past year, and this was to gauge the community's interest in the story. We had, let me look at the list, make sure I don't forget anybody. We had representatives from many, many communities, and they included Newington High School, Rockville High School, the Ethel Walker School, the University of Connecticut, the Manchester Public Library, the Conference of Churches, the YWCA, the Public Relations Office of Motley Biup, and the Office of Federal Judge Tim Covello. Now, the list of those who were invited but could not attend and urged us to please keep them informed is so long. I would be here all night mentioning that.
That's true.
But suffice it to say, we had a really good turnout for both of those 2 events. And the interest is definitely there for the story, for the preservation of history, for Dr. Beals. I do want to mention right now, because I'm sure I've got your interest piqued, so let me tell you that October 4, 5, 6, and 7, we have student performances at 10 in the morning. And on the evening of October 4th, we are doing a presentation for adults. There'll also be a pre-show speaker that night. And be sure you mark your calendar, because on the evening of Thursday, October 7th, Dr. Beals, Dr. Melba Pattillo Beals, who authored this memoir when she was of her life at 15, will be at the Bushnell to talk to us, and you don't want to miss that living history. So Sonja, let me go back to this forum for a minute. You attended the second forum that we held, and what was it, or what is it, about that story that even now, 53 years later, you find so compelling? Because you are a force in helping us spread this word.
What was so compelling to me about the story and about the book was it brought to life many of the stories that my mother shared with her children as we were growing up. It also brought to mind the fact that history is really a part of life today, that we all need to recognize that where we are today in life is because of where people were at a certain point of time in history, that made the access that we all have, people of color, women, people all over this world, it made their lives available. And I say that word available because had she not struggled and fought that fight and been the warrior that she was, along with the other 8 students, and fought for integration, there were many people in this world today who have achieved so much, including our president.
Yes.
Who would not have had the opportunities that they've had, and who would not have been able to change the world the way they've changed the world. She set a pace for all of us to follow and to walk along, and it just made so much available for so many. You as a woman who is anchoring a show, when we think back on Barbara Walters and the Today Show, when I think back upon all the changes that I have lived in my lifetime, it's because of warriors like Dr. Beals,
yes,
who've made those opportunities possible.
Absolutely.
And what's so nice is you can point to so many examples on a national level of people who are benefiting from that legacy. And you, obviously, as a president, clearly, but just sticking with that idea for a moment, General Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice. I mean, there have been really some Chief Justice Sotomayor.
Right, I was going to say.
Recent history, and they owe the legacy. It's
3 women
it's
on the United States Supreme Court when they begin their session this year.
Yes.
3 women. It's unheard of.
Time to celebrate.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, that's the day we open Warriors, isn't it? First Monday in October?
Yes, first Monday in October, absolutely. Definitely marking many, many passages that day. Now, when we talk about this show at the Bushnell and what we're putting out in the information we're sharing with others, we're very careful to let people know that the adaptation we've created uses language that is historically accurate for the time period. That means we are using the N-word in the show, and we are using it with all of the hatred, emotion, power to instill fear that was accurate during the 50s and at other times as well, but particularly when this story took place. And I remember, Sonja, at the second community forum when this discussion came up, you and several other members there had very strong feelings about not so much our use of the N-word, but about the word itself and its use in today's culture. Could you elaborate on that for us?
I grew up in a generation where the use of that word was very offensive. It is still very offensive to me. And to see the children today use the word the way they do in reference to a friend, they don't understand the context and the struggle that many went through, especially when I think back to my parents, to overcome that word as a reference to them. It was not used in a positive manner at all. I will never view it in a positive manner. It was used in a derogatory way. I still hold it in that context, that it is derogatory, it is negative, it is not positive. And so I think that when we present this play, and the children have a real understanding of what Dr. Beals went through and how that word was used to abuse her and the other students and a whole generation and group of people in this country, maybe they will understand the relevance as to why we condone its use today, and that it is not a positive but a negative force in the history of this country.
Yes.
And that's why, again, it is so relevant, because it takes it back to the true history of this country and that word.
One of the things that came out loud and clear from those community forums was the fact that the participants wanted to be sure students understood not just the events that happened that year, but the context in which those events happened, so that they would be able to understand the implication of some of those actions.
The struggle is what, and Scott and I were discussing this earlier, is what the children need to understand. The lives that were lost, the sacrifices that were made for them to have these opportunities today that many have taken for granted. You know, history is such a part of life. And that's why this is so relevant, to take these children back to what one 15-year-old girl and 8 of her friends went through to open those doors for them. For them to take for granted an education when she fought so hard to have an education. My mother grew up in the segregated South and was sent away to boarding school at age 10 or 11 because that was the only way she could get an education. And I remember her telling me how she would cry. She wanted to be at home with her father. Her mother was deceased. But a little girl at 10 years old being sent from a farm, from a segregated school in Mississippi to the city to go to school so she could have that opportunity. And that's why Dr. Beals' story and presenting it to the children is so relevant. They have to recall the struggles of a generation to provide them with an opportunity that they're taking for granted. And it should never be taken for granted at all.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think if there is a chance of breaking the cycle of this kind of segregation, and clearly we're talking with Warriors Don't Cry about a particular group of people who were subjugated, but we can look back in history. We were sort of ticking them off on our fingers before coming in today, of the number of different groups throughout time that have had this kind of treatment, and there are new groups having the treatment now. So if there's a chance of breaking the cycle, it's as important to understand where the Band-Aid needs to go to heal the wound, as it is to understand the culture and the environment from which the struggle came, or to carry the metaphor, what caused the wound, what caused the festering of the wound. You have to solve the underlying problem. You have to attack both. You have to topically and systemically. So hopefully our production will help with both of those and to bring about some change.
I think it creates a conscience. And you cannot exist in this world without having a conscience. And so history will remind people in this play, and Dr. Bill will remind people of the need to have that conscience about how you treat people.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. You know, this show is page 1, and usually on page 1, if my guest is an author, I ask the guest to read page 1 from his or her book. But since none of us actually wrote the book,
I would not make that claim.
a little different setup tonight. So what I've chosen to do is I'm going to read a couple of the diary entries from the book. And this first one is dated September 2nd, 1957. Dear God, maybe going to Central High isn't such a good idea after all. It is costing my family a lot of agony and energy, and I haven't even attended one day yet. Will Grandma always have to sit up guarding us? She can't go sitting there forever. What will become of us? Please give me some sign of what I am to do. Sonja, could you talk a little about the effect that the idea of integration had on a community at large? Because we're seeing from a little bit from this diary entry, and certainly more so in the book, that the whole community was affected. It wasn't just these 8 children and their families, but it was the community.
The impact was so severe on that community in Little Rock, because people felt threatened by the newness of sitting next to someone in a classroom, that they did everything they could to prevent that. We saw that throughout the story, about her mother losing her job, about her father being threatened with his job, about neighbors and friends shying away from them, about Melba not being able to go outside or be alone because of the threats. That threat was what people were using within the community to try and stop the progress that Melba and the other 8 students were trying to make. As she talked about her grandmother sitting up with the shotgun, I could relate to a story my mother told about her father sitting up all night, one night with his shotgun, as they hid another farmer's family in their home, in their farmhouse, because people were trying to take away the land from the other farmer, because they felt that the ownership of land by people of color, by African Americans in the South, meant they were making progress, and they wanted to deny that progress. And so Melba, in the city of Little Rock, and her family and the other people of color in that community were feeling that pain. If we take it away from them, if we deny them the opportunity to have a job or for credit in the grocery store, for a basic paycheck, we would make them think twice about wanting to take advantage of an education which would take them to the next level or the next step in life.
Now, if you are just joining us, let me just remind you that I'm speaking with Sonja Larkin-Thorne, who is a member of the Bushnell Board of Trustees, Scott Galbraith, who is the Vice President of Programs at the Bushnell, and we're talking about the memoir called Warriors Don't Cry by Dr. Melba Pattillo Beals. She's one of the Little Rock Nine, and this is the chronicle of the year 1957-58 that she and 8 other African American students integrated Central High School in Little Rock. So now I'm going to read one more diary entry from her book. Dear God, integration is a much bigger word than I thought. Nothing in my life is the same anymore. I feel so empty inside, like somebody scooped out the warm, sweet part of my spirit that made me smile and feel grateful to be alive. Most of my friends are behaving strangely. Some snub me, or talk to me like you talk to people you don't know well. We seem not to have things in common anymore. I feel different inside, like something is stretching me, growing me, making me somebody else. I spend a lot of time thinking about safety and life and death, and what would make the white people understand that I am equal to them. The change frightens me because I'm going somewhere, becoming someone, but I don't know where or who. Love, Melba Pattillo. Scott, would you talk with us about some of the content in the memoir that shows that transformation Melba talks about, going from the girl to the warrior?
Absolutely, and there's a lot to choose from there, I have to say. Central to any good storytelling is conflict, and clearly in this story there is enormous conflict. Not just the obvious cultural conflict and racial conflict, but there are internal conflicts that stimulate the story as well. That said, it's also imperative to have a beginning, middle, and end. We have to have growth, and that growth really is the growth of Melba from the, I don't want to use the word naive, but comparatively naive girl that she is at the start to the warrior that she is at the end. Along the way, some of the situations or incidents that cause that are really what I think compels readers to keep engaged, because you cannot believe not only the level of violence, but the frequency of the violence. It was a daily occurrence. One day it was having a lit piece of dynamite thrown at you down the hall. Another day it was being stabbed by a little flagpole with a Confederate flag on it, under the guise of posing for a picture in Life magazine. Yeah. It was having your heels walked until they bled. It was being in one of the most private places in the ladies' room, and there's on the commode, and you're having flaming paper thrown on you. So there are numerous incidents throughout that year.
And the acid in the eyes.
And the acid in the eyes, exactly right. It was endless. So there's tremendous opportunity for us to watch Melba experience, regroup, and grow. Experience, regroup, and go.
Yes.
Experience, regroup, and go. And the advisors along the way who helped her understand how to regroup and grow from those moments of trauma. There was one of the characters, Danny, who was the soldier assigned to protect her, who was with the 101st Airborne, was terrific at that. Some of the advice is actually advice that we can all take when we're faced with traumatic situations. But I think perhaps the biggest spiritual guider that she has is her grandmother, India, who actually utters the words that become the title of the book. You're one of God's warriors, and God's warriors don't cry. And that's just one of the pieces. But that spiritual guidance that she receives from, well, both her grandmother and her mother throughout the book, really lend to that growth of the warrior.
Yeah.
But I will say it's beautifully constructed, because you really do, in retrospect, I think you look back and go, wow, the girl at the start was not the girl at the end. And I experienced that, but I wasn't aware that I was being led down that road. Yeah. You just experience with her.
With her,
it's fascinating.
Which is beautiful. One more diary entry. Dear God, 16 was supposed to be my debut year. I was going to launch my campaign to become a popular girl about school, run for student council president maybe, perform on stage, sing the songs of Dinah Washington in school talent shows. Maybe they'd like my singing so much that I'd get a recording contract and help Mother and Grandma so they wouldn't have to work so hard. None of that's going to happen now. Then she has a P.S. God, let me learn how to stop being a warrior. Sometimes I just need to be a girl. And then the last one I want to, oh no, not quite the last one. Okay, March 1958. So you can see now the years progressing. It's March. Only the warrior exists in me now. Melba has gone away to hide. She's too frightened to stay here. So Sonja, we talked with Melba, Dr. Beals, last week. And in that conversation, she said that the main reason that she wanted to go to Central High School was not because of the fancy buildings or the equipment, but because her own life in a segregated world was, in her words, so horrific. So why do you think that it's important for today's youth to understand the context in which this story takes place?
It's important because children today take for granted so much in terms of what they have. Dr. Beals knew what it was like not to have access, not to be able to go into the hat store and try on a hat, not to be able to go into the dress store and try on a dress, but more importantly, not to go to a school where she could have the best books, the best opportunities, where she could sing on the stage, where she could perform, where she could feel the freedoms of a great education. She knew the inferior schools, as they were available to her, the secondhand books. And so what she was looking for, and what the students today need to understand, is that her generation and her mother before her and her grandmother India, who was such a force in her life, just wanted her to be able to experience the fullness of life, to be able to get into the best colleges. And so for children today to take for granted the struggle that those who came before them experienced is in my mind, unconscionable.
I agree.
They have to understand and be able to relate to, in order to appreciate what Dr. Beals went through as a child, in order to appreciate what they have today, and to never take for granted what this country has gone through and what the people have gone through to give them the opportunities that so many of them are not taking advantage of.
I think it's important, too, particularly in this story, to note Melba's mother, Lois, taught English. And she herself was one of the first people to integrate a college in Arkansas. So the pattern was set in the family.
Because they knew that education was the key.
Right. They did.
Education was the key to unlock the
right.
Well, I don't know how
the
to say
door
it.
of poverty.
But there you go.
Yes.
It's to unlock that whole culture of suppression.
The only progress was going to be through education.
Yeah.
Right. Last diary entry. Now, Vince, we find out earlier in the book, Vince is a young man from a different school, and she likes him, and he has to go out with her, and the grandmother and mother let them go to church together. So time has gone by, and now there's this entry. Vince and I sat together at the church dinner tonight. I can't talk to him about my Central High experience. I have lived through so much turmoil that my thoughts and dreams are now totally changed from when we met. We have drifted apart because we have so little in common. Now I feel as grown up as I once thought him to be. Sonja, I remember a comment that you made at the community forum about the importance of the church in the lives of the African American community. Could you elaborate a little on that for us?
Yes. The importance of the church. The church really was the foundation of the struggle in so many ways for the people who were fighting the fight. That was the sanctuary. That was the one place you could go where you could gather as a group of people to talk about the struggle without being a threat in a lot of ways. So it was that belief in God and that belief that there was a better way that people found in the church. When you think about the old Negro spiritual songs, and many people don't relate to those, they talk about the struggle. And most of them are based upon singing away the struggle. And also, when you look historically at slavery, that in many ways was how the slaves communicated with each other about what they were going to do next, about the escapes and the freedom trail. So the church had such a strong foundation in the struggle for equality and rights that it also was the foundation for Melba and her family, and that's where she turned for that peace that she found when she wrote to God every night in her diary.
Now, we only have about a minute left, and I want to bring up something that was posted in the Hartford Courant here on at the end of August. There was an article about the education achievement gap between, quote, low-income students and their more affluent peers, end quote. The gap, 20%, the highest in the nation. And I have about 30 seconds. Sonja, give me your reaction to that statistic.
Sad, enough to make you cry, but something that I think is we can overcome if parents and students and teachers can come together and look at Dr. Beals' struggle and say, we too can close that gap.
And the value of education.
And the value of education.
You need to take it as a motivation to change it.
That's right.
Absolutely. I like that. And on that very positive note, thank you, Scott, for joining me tonight.
Absolutely.
Sonja, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
And another thank you to my crew. A reminder, Warriors Don't Cry at the Bushnell, October 4, 5, 6, and 7 for students, October 4 in the evening for adults, and Dr. Beals herself will be at the Bushnell on the evening of October 7th. I will close with the words of the writer Ursula Le Guin, who said, "There have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories. So find your story and find a way to tell it. And do join us again next time. Thank you."
Food for the crew and guests was provided by Manchester Grill of Manchester, Connecticut, and Angelo's Restaurant of Glastonbury, Connecticut. Be sure to send your writing questions and your comments on the book club selection to Zita at page 1, P.O. Box 1515, Manchester, Connecticut, 06045-1515, or send an email to Zita at page1tv.com.